Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Civil Clarity Reports. I'm one of your hosts, John Noel, along with Jody Kirk, and we are here with some special guests. We got Ron Mendenhall here, we got Bobby Mendenhall here, and we got Mr. Anonymous here. Gentlemen, how are you this evening?
I'm doing
very
good.
well.
Good. Well, we are recording tonight because of what has occurred today, the decision that came down in New York. All 34 counts, convicted, former President Donald Trump, current candidate for president. We want to discuss this verdict. What is it going to lead to? How do we move forward? Is it even going to affect any of the outcome of the election, which right now is showing the former president leading across the board? But obviously, we know how polls are. Not to say that we trust it. Jody, what's your opinion on this verdict?
My opinion is all they did was just reinforce the fact that I will be voting for Trump. There was a poll that came out that stated basically about 20% of the individuals that would normally vote for Trump if he's convicted and gets a felony, they're willing to question that. There's also about 10% of the Democrats who have stated that if they go through and convict him, they kind of consider what the Democrats are doing as far as the politic and lawfare they're playing as just that they're turning us into a banana republic, and they're willing to step away from it and vote for Trump just because of what they're doing. They consider that more corrupt than what Trump did. So my attitude towards it is I think the whole thing is nothing more than them attempting to keep Biden's promise 3 years ago. Biden stepped up on the podium and he turned around and made the statement that he had a way to keep Trump from running for president and getting elected, and he was going to ensure that Trump would not get reelected, and it was already in progress. Shortly thereafter, you had 4 separate indictments that came down, all of them leading to different paths. At this point, this is the only thing they've got him on. I don't think the judge is actually foolish enough to give him jail time.
Yes, he is.
He's already received a number of death threats, and the trick is even if he gives him jail time, at that point Trump's going to get elected. You're just going to push it right into the ballpark, and then you're going to have retaliation from the Trump administration towards this individual, along with anybody else like him. So I don't think he's actually going to give him jail time, but I don't know that for a fact. I mean, they're doing some crazy stuff. I've never seen anything quite like this in my lifetime. I grew up, went through the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and the hippie generation, and on into disco, through the yuppies, on up through, the Clintons, the whole not gambit here. And I don't think I've ever seen him get to this point or be this obsessed with one individual. I've never seen them be that obsessed with one individual.
Right. Where do you see this going, Ron? Where do you see this whole thing going?
I don't think it's against one individual. It's like Trump has always said. He says, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. And by what was done today just proves that that's the truth, because if they could do that to him, imagine what they could do that to us. He's a billionaire. Mm-hmm. He could afford these very expensive lawyers that's costing him, what, $2-3 million a day, probably. Which one of us can afford that? None. And you already see how they're going after people that are American patriots. I mean, look at the January 6th. Those guys are all in jail for what? So they've already put them in jail. The guy from, I think it was Ohio, that the FBI went to his house because he protested, I think at an abortion clinic or some other clinic, and he didn't cause any damage, any harm. But what happens to him? They get a search warrant for his house. They go to his house. They block his camera on his doorknob. They do not wear body cams. It's the FBI. They don't
Yeah,
wear
I know.
body cams. They tell the police department not to wear their body cams. And when they break his door down on a search warrant, he starts shooting. Who wouldn't? And they shot him and killed him. That just tells you how rotten this government is. So if they're going to do it, they're doing that to those people. You don't think they're going to come after us?
Oh, I know.
The people that back Trump, that vote for Trump, I guarantee it, they're going to come after us. That's the whole thing. They're going to block Christians. They're going to, next thing you know, they're going to want to get rid of Christians. And that's be religious. That's all in the Bible. That's going to happen. And these things they did with Trump today, how can all those people say 34 counts is guilty, yet there's no proof except for a liar that's already been to prison for lying? And I don't know if you guys seen anything about Cohen, but he was directed under, I forget the guy's name. Something, his last name was an M. He also had another guy that he paid for 10 years to go against America and be a stooge. And now Cohen became part of that group. I think Cohen is a plant by the FBI. So how can what I don't understand is it's got to be something bigger than this government, because how can all these people that's from the government agree to say this thing is right when they know it's not right? The only thing Trump did was reevaluate his property like anybody else in the world would do. And like everybody, mortgage companies, realtors, they all do it. My house is worth $400,000. They come back and say, no, it's only worth $380. Well, okay, that's all Trump did. That's not illegal.
No.
And they give them all guilty on those. And then if you listen to anything about the trial, every time his defense wanted to object, the judge sustained them. They couldn't bring in two witnesses that were the best mortgage lawyers in the country. They wouldn't let them bring them in. Why? It was a kangaroo court. I mean, we all knew this was going to happen. I didn't know all the guilty would happen. I thought maybe it'd be a hung jury.
I was hoping for that.
I was hoping for it. I knew he wasn't going to be innocent. They're not going to let that happen. But I thought, well, okay, maybe it's going to be a hung jury. No, all 34 counts of guilty. How can they come up with that when they didn't even know what the crime was until the very end? Now, in New York state law, the defense does their rest first, and then the district attorneys, the prosecutors, give their statement at the end of the court. So the defense gave their statement, and then that's when Alvin Bragg stood up and he says, this is what we're charging him with. They never knew that before this time. We're charging him with trying to falsify an election or something like that.
Right.
His defense team didn't even know that until they were given their closing arguments. The defense cannot come back with any rebuttal in New York.
Yeah. Agreed.
So how could all these people sit there and go, well, that's not right?
That's
we didn't know what the charge
typical
was.
New York, though.
That is.
That's typical of the New York courtrooms.
Okay, exactly. Well, that's going on all across the country because, I mean, look at your Democratic Party. You mean there's not one Democrat, except for the one in California the other day that quit because she said enough's enough. And she was a Democrat. But how could all these people, 12 jurors, not one of them can say, there's no crime here. This isn't right. I mean, how was that possible?
Well, they didn't say it was a unanimous jury.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be. According to this judge, it didn't have to be unanimous. All this judge was giving them instructions on how to convict him.
Right.
Yes.
But they didn't say that the jury was unanimous. They just came back with the verdict of he was guilty. Supposedly there was some controversy going on there as far as some of the jurors were kind of contesting the way the judge laid down the rules. Because the way the judge laid down the rules is they didn't all have to find him guilty.
Well, we're not going to find out for probably.
And it's like, now wait a minute, that's not, proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
There is no proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Which
let me get Anonymous. Let me throw him into this conversation here. So the question I have for you, Anonymous, is in your opinion, does this make Trump more electable in your opinion, or does it harm him?
Well, I tend to think that, I mean, there's a lot of things that took place before any of this court thing happened. And, we talk about how vile and wicked the FBI and the CIA and all these people are. They raided Trump's home, and they could have very, very easily lied about everything they found in his home. They could have said, oh, yeah, we found this and we found that. They could have very easily said he's guilty of treason. Very easily. These are powerful organizations we're talking about. And so but they didn't do that. And so I have to ask why that is. And so now we come to this trial, which, okay, yeah, it's kind of a travesty, but really it doesn't stop him from running for president. And that's, it kind of makes me feel like maybe this is a setup. They made him more popular. Now you have people who are Democrats who are siding with Trump, and they warned about it too. I remember a discussion we had before about this where the Democrats warned it was not a good idea to indict him and convict him. And here they did it anyway, and look exactly what happened. They made him more popular. I don't know, it almost seems intentional to me. Yeah. And when we go back to some of these things we talked about the government, look what the government can do to us. And at what point do people honestly and truly believe the government couldn't always have done that? Malcolm X in the 60s.
They couldn't have. There
Malcolm X in the 60s. Malcolm X in the 60s made it clear. He said that here you have the media. The media has the ability to make the good look bad and the bad look good. Now that's power. Mm-hmm. That was a quote from the 60s by Malcolm X. We have tons of poems and books.
But prior to technology, you had newspapers. Okay. So if something broke loose in California, you didn't hear about it for 2 or 3 weeks. So it came down to, prior to technology intervening in this, they wouldn't have been able to pull this off. Okay.
Right, but then you come to George Bush Jr., who comes in, and I know it was a bipartisan thing, but the Republicans were totally on board with the Patriot Act, which was a complete violation of the United States Constitution. All they had to do was say they believed you were guilty of something, particularly terrorism, whether it be domestic or foreign or whatever. They could arrest you. You'd get no legal representation. There was no jury trial by your peers. There was no trial. And they could hold you indefinitely.
Right.
And then that was followed up by Barack Obama with the Freedom Act.
The NDAA.
So at what point do we really honestly believe that these things, the government hasn't always had that power? Maybe they're more powerful now than before, and they have greater abilities now than before. But we're talking about human history here, 10,000 years.
Right.
And this has happened in every major empire, every major government, since the beginning of known history. And so it's really, to be honest, it's not surprising to me at all. None of this is.
Well, Bobby, I mean, what's going on with the Republican Party? I mean, why have they not really stepped up to the plate, been more vocal about this? I mean, this is going to be their candidate, right? Some of them may not like it. Nikki Haley came out, I think, somewhat grudgingly, but nonetheless, she has endorsed the former president. But it doesn't seem like any of the other Republicans seem to be pretty much just sitting on the sidelines. What's going on there?
Weakness. I'm thinking that what this other guy was saying about how the government had all this power, before Trump, but they never used it. So my question is, why are they using it now?
Well, I think they've always used it.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think they've always used it, Bill. I
I mean,
mean,
why?
why haven't they released the file?
I don't recall them going after any other president like they're going after Trump.
Well, they shot one.
And they had that power before to do it, like this other guy said. But why now?
Well, they shot one.
They killed Kennedy. They shot Reagan, Nixon.
Yeah, that was
the government shot Reagan, and the government killed Kennedy. We're talking about our government.
Yeah, why haven't they released the files on that, Bill? It's been 70 years. Everybody that had to do anything, they're dead.
That's all theory there. Whatever, but that wasn't the government. I mean, it might have been the government, but that was never proved it was the government. This is actually our government.
The documents that led to Kennedy were supposed to be sealed for a 50-year period. They were supposed to be released after 50 years. That was to ensure that nobody connected to the Kennedy name would be harmed by what had been investigated and found out. Now, when we reached that 50-year mark, they chose to keep it sealed. And they still, to this day, have not released that information. They've released certain parts of it, but most of those documents are redacted, so they got big black marks across them, so you can't read what it says.
If it wasn't our government, and it was either a Cuban conspiracy, a mafia hit, who knows? Why won't the government release it? If it was a mafia hit, people would be like, well, that sucks. If it was the Cubans that did it, it's going to be, well, that sucks. If it was the Russians that did it, well, that sucks. That's all people are going to do. But if our government did it, that's going to be a lot of backlash from the citizens of America. So they haven't released it. Why else won't they release it? Why won't they release it? What are they hiding? It's the same thing with the guys that went up to the guy's house and covered all the cameras before they shot him. What were they trying to hide?
They weren't. They were trying to get him to come out so they could shoot him.
Exactly. Why was the FBI armed and were authorized to use deadly force when they did the raid on Mar-a-Lago?
I know.
Why was that?
They still haven't redacted all the papers.
People say that that's just normal procedure for when they raided Mar-a-Lago. Trump is not a normal person. There's gray areas. All that stuff has to get okayed before they can do that. And what they're doing is they're putting the Secret Service and the FBI, both armed, one saying, no, you can't come in. The other one says, yes, we are coming in. That could have been a travesty.
Oh, yeah.
You could have had a gun battle right there, which is probably what they wanted, but Trump wasn't there, so they couldn't assassinate him like they did Kennedy. And then you got to think back. The government wasn't that bad back in the days. Well, they found out recently in the last 2 years that the Gulf of Tonkin never happened. Never happened. So why did we go to war with Vietnam, Bill? If they blamed it on the attacks in the Gulf of Tonkin. Never happened. That's proven.
We went to war for oil, and we didn't go to war. We went to a police action. My stepfather used to get furious at people who would sit there and say, we lost the Vietnam War. He said, first off, we never went to war with Vietnam. We never declared war against Vietnam. We were sent there as a UN peacekeeping force.
Yeah, they called it a conflict.
Yeah.
Is what they called it. Well, the 52,700 men that died won't call it a conflict.
Correct.
So I mean, what were we after less than 10 years in Afghanistan? We all knew we couldn't do anything with that country. Russia tried it. They got their asses kicked. We went in there and tried to make what they call, quote unquote, a democracy state. How can you do that when the Afghanistans all have their own little villages and their own little laws, and village A is not going to follow the laws of village B.
Right.
Village B is not going to follow the laws of village A.
And we also have to look.
Yeah.
And if we were going to go after the people, if we were going to go after the people that were responsible for 9/11, then why weren't we in Saudi Arabia? Because that's where they all were from.
Yeah.
They're from Saudi Arabia. They weren't from Iraq. And then they go, well, Iraq has chemical weapons.
which
Well,
we
yeah,
gave them,
Weapons of
I
mass
might add.
destruction that were never found.
And we knew it because we gave them to them when they were at war with, I think it was Afghanistan.
No,
So
Iran.
Was it Iran? Iran?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was Iran. So we knew they had them. Dude, that was just a thing. Do you think the United States will trade blood for money? Absolutely. They did it in Vietnam and they did it in Afghanistan. We weren't.
Well,
we weren't
I think what we're seeing though so far, I think, in all honesty, with Trump, is we are seeing somewhat of an awakening. I think with many different demographics, and I don't think this is hyperbole. I really think this is actually happening. I think what you're seeing in terms of minorities, black people supporting Trump, that number has gone up to around 20%, I believe. Quite honestly, in a general election, he secures 8% of that vote and he wins. He's looking at 22% of that support. He's looking at a huge increase in number of Hispanics. In terms of those that came to this country even illegally over the last 20 years, he's seen a huge increase in support. So this does seem to be, there does seem to be a movement going on with him.
Oh,
now,
absolutely.
There is a movement now. Is the government definitely interfering in this? I mean, Bob, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I think they're interfering. I think, yeah, sure. Right now, Trump's ahead. Well, if you believe the polls, but of course, he's ahead. He's probably even farther ahead what the polls say. But my fear is they'll find some way to take him off the ballot, since they're finding him guilty of everything. And you talk about interference with an election. That's exactly what's going on right now. Yeah, sure, the government probably was not that great back in Vietnam or whatever, but it sure ain't that great now either, is it?
No.
Well, to me, they've gotten so big and so powerful now because they got away with it for so many years that now they don't fear anything. They don't fear nothing. And that's why all this is coming out. They're like, you know what? We can do anything we want. We're that powerful. And if you go against us, well, we're going to throw you in jail.
I disagree with you as far as their fear. Because if they didn't fear us, they wouldn't be shipping rifles and ammunition to every government agency in the United States and arming up people like our motor vehicle division. Okay.
Well,
if they weren't worried, they wouldn't do that. Okay.
Well, they also backed it up with what, 50 or 60 million illegal immigrants here?
Oh, yeah.
How many of them are soldiers? We don't know.
35,000 so far this year have crossed our southern border that are in military camis. They are carrying a military backpack, and they are Chinese national males of military age.
Well, they're all coming in now. They're all military age men.
And nobody in the press wants to report that. The only place you hear that is from these people who are calling in saying, I got it on camera, man.
Yep.
I showed it to the press, and they won't put it out there.
They're censoring it. Absolutely. What do you think?
Anonymous, let me ask you a question, though, too. Do you think, in your opinion, that maybe that this goes, is Obama the puppet master in this whole facade that's been seen on, or is it bigger than Obama, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there's really no evidence or proof. How would we know? I would venture that he definitely has influence. Just as I think George Bush Jr. still has influence. I mean, we take a look at this. When George Bush Jr. was president, everybody hated him. He was a criminal, right? Who are Democrat, that is. He was a criminal. He was everyone related to him were criminal. I saw when Facebook was out, everyone posted about him being a criminal and how wicked and evil he was. But as soon as he said something bad about Trump, suddenly he becomes a hero. Everyone loves him. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I really feel like Yeah, I would say he probably has influence, but the problem is everyone is being kept in the dark. So really, all of us are making guesses right now as
Well,
to
we
what's.
are. We're making guesses, but I got to be honest with you. One of the reasons I really insert him into this equation is, let's be honest, from the very beginning, he gets elected, wins a Nobel Peace Prize for writing a book that he didn't even write. Right? It's a $60 million deal for his autobiography. You're seeing the influence that he does have with Hollywood. I think I really truly believe that him and George Soros are working together. That actually, we were talking a little bit, Bobby and I, about an approach to a new world order, and definitely you're
I've
kind
been
of seeing
hearing
this now come to fruition.
I've been hearing about the New World Order since I was in the 70s when I was in elementary school. Like there's whispers of it. There's always been whispers of it. So it's
Well,
not
it's
like
There was
anything
more than
new.
whispers in the late '90s with Bush
yeah.
Senior. He got up there and announced that we were joining the New World Order, and then had to come back 3 days later and explain that the New World Order consisted of the New World economics. Okay.
Yeah, he
Yes.
changed it.
Well, that's basically the same thing. You control the world's economy, you control the world order.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. We will be back. Until then, we will see you next time.